Welcome to the Black on Black Education Podcast, where we interview the most brilliant minds
and connected hearts to discuss our shared passion for the transformation,
the revolution,
reimagining,
and recreation
of education in the Black community.
My name is Eva Loren Jean Charles, founder of Black on Black Education and New York City high school teacher.
And I'm Jamal Thomas, her partner and dad, education enthusiast.
And we're your hosts. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
And most importantly, to enjoy the episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Black on Black Education Podcast. As always, we ask our guests, who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was just such a tight intro. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for you. But
no worries. You know what? I'm going to start all over.
Okay. So you just want me to go right in. Okay. Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Sorry about that.
No problem. It's not the first time.
I'm sure.
Welcome back to the Black on Black Education Podcast. Another episode. We are here. Now I'm messing up. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to the Black on Black Education Podcast. As always, we ask our guests, who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
It's great to be on with you all. I'm Will Jawando. I'm an attorney, an activist. I'm a council member in Montgomery County, Maryland, Maryland's largest jurisdiction, and father of four, husband to a great wife, Michelle, and lifelong advocate for educational equity and criminal justice reform.
Got it.
Yeah, definitely topics near and dear to my heart. Things that I cannot wait to dig into more in this conversation. But let's get started right from the gate, right? We want to have a conversation with you. Your story is the 7 Black fathers, right? So talk to us about that story and how it's brought you into the work that you're doing.
Yeah, my 7 Black fathers, and it's behind me there. That's the cover of the book there. You know, I'll put it close to the screen for everybody. There you go. Came out in May. It's a memoir, but it's told through the lens of these 7 Black men, my surrogate fathers, my actual father. Each one has a chapter. There's 7 chapters in an introduction, who really gave me what I needed to stay on track and to survive. The superhuman kind of power of engagement, particularly for Black youth and Black men and boys in particular. There's a secret sauce there, and every relationship was different. And I just kind of tell my life story through that, from my 4th grade math teacher, Mr. Williams, the only Black male teacher I ever had, who helped me deal with bullying, taught me how to tie a tie, all the way through Barack Obama, who I worked for in the Senate and the White House, who's really crucial in my development as a husband and a father. So I tell that story, and it's an affirmative story, but also it's a real story as well. I think something a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, I it's definitely something. Fatherhood being like one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's something I need to pick up and put on the proverbial long reading list. But I
did the audio version too, so you can listen to it if you want to.
Even better. Yeah, so dive into it a little bit more, man. Over the course of the years, how we look at fatherhood, Black fatherhood in particular, has changed. How did that influence the book for you?
Oh, it was a crucial part. I wanted to, expand the definition of fatherhood or mentorship. I think we narrow it in a lot of ways and think it means one thing. Obviously, it can be a moment. It can be a series of moments. It could be a lifetime relationship. But fathering, mothering, mentorship is really broader than I think most of us think about it. So that was one thing. The other thing, I wanted to really lay to waste the stereotype and the trope of the absent Black father. That was not my experience. And Can you always have more and have things be additive? Absolutely. But we are the treasure of our own communities. And I wrote a piece in the Boston Globe for Father's Day this year, talking about, the myth of the absent Black father, and that Black fathers are actually more present in the lives of their children and more active than fathers of other races. More than half of Black fathers live in the home with their children. That means that they're not all married, but that's a rising trend in all communities. So I wanted to really show the diversity of our community. You don't have to be perfect to be a father, to be a mentor, to have something to offer. And so that's one of the goals of this book, in addition to telling my story, but because I really was so blessed to have these mentors, these father figures. And a lot of us, if I asked you, who are your 7, you would be able to think about some people who had that impact on you. And while we need more of those relationships, we shouldn't discount that it's happening in our community every day.
I just want to quickly say I did read that article, and now like it's all coming together. So like, you know what I mean? I'm a fan, man. I'm a fan.
I appreciate it.
No, and I mean, I love that, because I will never be a father, right? I will never be able to live into what that role looks and feels like, but to understand from the vantage point with which you both can speak about this, it's a super important conversation, right? Because I think that I've had people who I barely know, like, seeing me and my dad interact, and who were like, it's so beautiful to see this, as if it's some sort of anomaly, right? And so I think that it is really important that we have these in-depth conversations around what Black fatherhood means, what it means to be able to engage with all of the men in your community, and being able to learn and grow from them, and really looking at that village mindset. So, I mean, just talk about the father's role in the Black family. So you started to get into some of them statistics and some of those ideas that we want to start to shift from the stereotypes that we know. But how has it changed over the decades? What does it look like in terms of us flipping the stereotype on its head and getting people to really dig into some of those statistics that you already brought up in the last question?
Yeah, I mean, well, like many things in our community, in the Black community, it's a two-sided coin, right? There are certainly systemic and institutional and factors that make it difficult for us to succeed, but also that remove, for example, Black men from our communities, right? If you look at something like mass incarceration, New York Times a few years ago did an article on the million Black men who are missing from their communities because of early death or incarceration. So there's certainly a story there, but at the same time, there's another side to it that, as some of the stuff I talked about, like a 2017 CDC study that said Black fathers are actually more likely to bathe or read to or help with homework their children in the home than other fathers, that more than half are present in their homes, live with their children. Things that I think if you told most people, they'd be like, there's no way that's true. And because of what society has said. Yeah. So both things can be true. We can need to remove the institutional and structural barriers to make it easier and enable more positive relationships for our Black fathers in particular, and any parent or guardian of any race. But we also need to tell the full true story. One of the reasons I wrote my book, and I frame in the introduction this study on race and income that was done by Raj Shetty and researchers from Stanford and Harvard. And it looked at 20 million children that were born between 1978 and 1983 in the United States. I'm in that category. I think probably maybe one of y'all is, or maybe you're younger than that. And it looked at the composition of those families. So that's everything that you learn from the census: 1-parent, 2-parent household, where did they live, obviously, level of education. And then it looked at IRS data. What were those? It matched it up. What were they making? What were those families making? Then it looked in a longitudinal way 35, 40 years later and said, where are these kids now? And one of the things it showed was that in 99% of census tracts in the nation, 99%, that Black boys and white boys from the same neighborhoods, from the same circumstances, same level of income when they were born, 1-parent, 2-parent, same level of education, had wide earnings gaps 40 years later. Only thing was different was that one was Black and one was white. Right. And when you controlled for all that stuff, there were these 1% communities, of which I grew up next to here in Silver Spring, Maryland, where that wasn't true, where Black boys and white boys from the same neighborhood were doing similarly well 40 years later. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of those neighborhoods was that they had a larger percentage of working class Black fathers in them. Wow. Not necessarily the fathers of the children, but these men were present in communities. And one of the ways I got the idea to frame my book was that I realized I met 4 of my 7 Black fathers in that zip code. And so anyway, it's the point of it's much more complex than I think people let on. but the one thing I do know from personal experience and from data is that these relationships are life-changing, life-saving.
100%. You know, it's you know, I get the you know, all the time, like praise, you know, around, you know, being a father, and I mean, I guess I've shared the story on the podcast in the past, but you know, being that we're specifically talking about fatherhood, you know, I didn't find out about Eva till she was 6 years old, so you know, that was, you know, a crazy thing, you know, in and of itself, and ultimately, you know, when she got to be around 12, she came to stay with me, and it was life-changing, you know, to me. I imagine it was you know, life-changing to her, as well. And it speaks to, you know, like these are the stories that we hear, or that we don't hear, I should say. And you know, I'm excited to listen to your book, because I imagine those connections with the various different people that you're talking about, that village, you get that not just from being, you know, the person in the house. It's the uncle, it's the grandfather, it's the teacher, it's all of these various different people being able to look a little girl in her eye and say, I love you and you're beautiful, and these things, and have that, you know, get locked in, and they believe it. The absence of that, it robs our young people of so much. So I love the fact that you said 4 people right in the zip code. That means that there's a spirit within that zip code. Somebody somewhere is talking about, you know, look, this community, we're going to lift the whole thing up, you know, whether it's just our individual household, right, or our community at large. So I love the fact that you kind of spoke to that. How did you, like, in terms of, so your own father, what was the story? I can imagine some fathers out there being like, oh, you know, 7 fathers, I'm the father. Like, you know what I mean? That's something to that effect. How did your dad approach, you know, the idea that, you know, you're speaking about this collective group of people who had significant influence for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the title grabs people in a lot of different ways. You know, most people are like, oh, that's interesting. But I had one person say, like, what, was your mother like promiscuous or something? I was like, come on, man, you know, like so like, you know, I was like, yeah, that you missed the whole point here. But you know, so obviously I only have one biological father, and you know, I'm a human being. I'm not an alien, and the point is, you know, he is the last chapter. As I said, the book is structured an introduction in 7 chapters. My biological father, Will Jawando, who passed away in 2017, is the last chapter. My stepfather, Joseph Jacob, who my mom remarries when I'm 10 years old, is the first chapter. So they're the bookends. And then the other 5 men, my 4th grade math teacher, 2 of my mom's coworkers at a newsletter publishing company that she was at, a coach and choir director at my high school, and President Obama round out the list. And they're all very different people. I knew Mr. Williams, for example, you know, 30 years ago for 9 months, never saw him again, never found out his first name until I was researching the book, trying to find out where he was. And it's Chuck, in case you're wondering. And, you know, but he had a huge impact on my life. You know, Dean Sanwo-Olu, who's the IT director, Nigerian IT director. My dad's from Nigeria. He immigrated to this country for school. That's where Jawando comes from. Dean ends up taking me on my first trip to Nigeria when I'm 19 years old. I had never been, and helps me connect to that part of my heritage, and ultimately is part of what helps me understand and eventually reconcile with my biological father, from whom I really have no relationship to speak of for the first, you know, 10, 15 years of my life. He's present in the home from 0 to 6, but I describe him in the book as an absent presence, you know, there, but not accessible, not engaging. And so yeah, all of these men are different. But there's women in the book too. My mother's a huge force. My wife is a huge force. There's several mentors. My first job on Capitol Hill is a woman, Lorraine Miller, who I talk about in the book. So I think these are applicable to any type of mentoring or loving or nurturing relationship. But I know for a fact, what I posit here is that in the lives of Black men and boys who have been denigrated and continue to be put down and demonized and dehumanized, that these relationships are so needed. To your point of that little girl, your daughter, Eva, I have an Eva. Imagine if every relationship, every person they encounter in their community is saying something positive to them, is taking a moment to speak life into them. Imagine the aggregate nature of that. And I think we downplay that. And we think it has to be one thing, and it could be a lot of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to stay there, right? Like, how do we dig into this "it takes a village" mentality? And so as a council member, as somebody who's like a part of local politics, right? As an individual who lives in the county that you serve, right? As a father, as a parent to your 4 children, like, what does it feel like? What does it look like? And what does it have to feel and look like in communities of color, particularly, to live into this "it takes a village" mindset and be able to build off of that in so many different arenas, whether it be education, public health, criminal justice reform, police reform, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I talk about in the book, it's also a call to action that we need to enable more of these relationships through personal relationship, our individual responsibility to not only to have these relationships with young people, but if you're a young person, to be open to the relationship, right? Like, one thing, mentorship and fatherhood, it's not one way. Like, if you're not willing to receive it, it's going to be hard to get. And then we need policy change, right? Like, I'm a council member. I fund our school system. We have 211 schools. The schools that need it most don't have after school programs that are affordable, right? Which we add a couple every year, but that's an urgent need. Kids need places to go where they can be with trusted adults who care about them after school, right? That's a policy choice. They're more likely to engage with someone who can do this for them if they're in a space where it can happen, right? And programs, right? Like, we need programs, we need to fund and to support and expand dramatically, particularly coming out of COVID, the programs that do this type of work. I'll give you one example. I spoke at the Big Brothers Big Sisters conference, which is one type program where it's a longer term, you match someone for a number of years with a big brother or a big sister. They have a 30,000 children waiting list. 30,000. That's one program. Most of them are young Black men, boys. So all of us have to step up, both personally. So if you're not doing this for some people in your life, you must do it. It's in our community, it's urgent. And then advocate for this policy and programmatic changes and funding that will enable that for more children, even outside of your neighborhood. So that's kind of what I call for in the book. Black male teachers, 2% of the teaching workforce.
2%.
2%. And they are literally unicorns. And there's studies now that show for Black children who have a Black teacher in the elementary grades, they are going to have higher grades in middle and high school. It's statistically proven. And I had one in my whole career, Mr. Williams, only Black male teacher I ever had. And he had a huge impact on me. So if you're a superintendent, if you're a principal, if you're a citizen, a resident, you need to be advocating for programs like Bond. We have an initiative called Bond here in Maryland to recruit, retain, and compensate appropriately Black male teachers, for example. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but we have to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Big shout out to the Bond Academy. We actually we presented at the last Academy, and I'll be on the Bond Academy podcast sometime in the fall. So definitely a great group of folks. And Center for Black Educator Development is Black Men Teach here.
Black Teacher Project and out in Oakland.
So there's lots of people, whose aim is to do this. And as a policymaker, I am curious to hear from you, a little bit deeper into this, just because, yes, we do need to make choices on funding. But it seems like we're so far away from, truly professionalizing, teaching. So it's at a point where, when Black male gets a job as a teacher, and he, in the traditional sense, he's supposed to be this breadwinner and all of these things. It's my understanding is that one of the reasons why teaching is such a poorly paid profession in general is because at some point it was decided that this was going to be women's work. And so because they said it was going to be women's work, they only needed to get this much. And so now the status quo sits with us years later. And, you know, if you're a teacher for 25 years, 30 years, okay, now maybe you're up in this, you know, 6 figures and you're doing okay. But for the people who just enter into the classroom and enter in with, you know, who knows what kind of student loans and things to that effect, it feels like a really, really, really tough climb for people. So from a policy, you know, perspective, and I'm on my local school board, I'm not sure, you know, the money just seems like it's just not there to find it. So like, who are you communicating with on how to make the changes? Because we the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll let you go, is I don't see the property tax thing changing. I don't see how we functionally make that adjustment, you know, toward around the whole country. So what do you see? Is it a bigger federal role? Is it how do we, you know, make this a priority?
Yeah. What state are you in?
I'm in New York.
You guys are in New York, yeah. You know, I worked for Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown for a number of years. I worked in Congress for Nancy Pelosi, for Sherrod Brown, Barack Obama. And while I was working for him, I handled the education portfolio. And there was a Ohio Supreme Court case that they had declared the Ohio funding formula unconstitutional, you know, under the state constitution, in that it didn't fund, you know, equitably schools, because they have to go, they're one of these crazy states where you have to go and pass a levy, a tax every time you want to do something locally for education. And if people don't pass it, the schools don't get the funding. You know, it's just, and so in the lower income areas, it obviously becomes like a snowball effect. So I don't think we can give up on that. You know, one of the things that was unfortunate with the way the U.S. developed is that we developed, you know, we have all these school districts that are autonomous and that operate, you know, on their own. So, you know, there does need to be, I think, a reevaluation, you know, on the federal role. Now, that has to come with money, right? You know, the bad part of No Child Left Behind was that you had the standards, but you didn't have the funding, and it took flexibility, and we didn't pay teachers enough. So there's a whole thing. We passed this thing called the Maryland Blueprint for Maryland's future, and for our children, and which was a encompassing education bill that raised teacher pay to 6. So right now it's 60,000 starting. Still not enough, but better than it was. You know, put us on a path towards pre-K. Did a whole bunch of things that, you know, in early childhood and teacher preparation and loan forgiveness and a lot of things. And we had to fund it. And so we are, you know, that's going to be a multi-year, 10-year commitment, but we've committed as a state to do that. That needs to happen in more places. We do need to professionalize the profession, and we need to give more flexibility to teachers. I think one of the downsides of teachers are just stressed out, man. And I've seen it in my own kid's life.
Yeah.
You know, like they get to that 2-3 year point, they're ready to leave, or they see it as a starter job, right? It's not yet where you can, you know, unless you're like a true believer, which many are, you're not creating that career lattice. So we need to improve that. We need to have more progressive taxation, right? So it's not just property tax. It's like, let's tax the wealthy people and fund our schools, right? You know, like Jeff Bezos and all these billionaires, they, you know, more than doubled their wealth in the pandemic. You know, in a state like Maryland, we have 1 in 10 of our residents are millionaires. We have more millionaires per capita than any other state, depending, it goes back and forth between us and Connecticut. And I say, look, if you do well, great, but you should be contributing to education. So I think there's a lot of things we need to do. There's not just one thing. I could go on all night, but
I mean, it sounds like you're just talking about priorities, right? And I think that like something that we have in conversation with so many people, not only on this podcast, but in all the other spaces that we're working in, is that with whether it's an individual school, whether it's a school district, or whether it's the entirety of the school system at large, it's about what our priorities are. And if our priorities are our kids genuinely and truly learning and being prepared for what their life looks like after secondary education, then there has to be a serious overhaul of like the way that education is currently happening. I am a full-time teacher. I'm in the classroom every single day. I do not get paid enough. I am stressed out. And those things are just there. It's true. And it's indicative of a lot of the feelings and emotions that we have every time we have another educator on the podcast. So it's always great to hear from a policy perspective, or us to be able to think about what are the different ways that we can advocate. Like, I am really big on that one-to-one advocacy in the building that I serve, or with the educators that I'm working with. But I think it's also important for people to say, like, okay, I'm going to build on that and think about the ways that we genuinely and specifically advocate for changes in policy, advocate for it to be a district change, right? So I appreciate people being able to hear those pieces, because I think sometimes, like, the problems feel so large, folks don't even know where to go to get those problems solved. So I definitely appreciate you breaking that down. And so, while we're talking about schools, I just want to talk a little bit about like the role of educators. So something that we found in our research of your work is you really want to think about how we put Black children in a position to not only survive, but to thrive. And so talk about the role of educators in that, and how it's not even the changes that we need to make, but like the mindset shifts that we need to make within the education system for us to get to that point where Black children are thriving.
Oh, that could be like the topic of your podcast for like 10 weeks. But one, we have to commit to telling to anti-racist training, pedagogy, and just really awareness. I mean, like, one of the themes in my book, and I'm not unique, I go to 5 schools before I'm in 7th grade. Was recommended for special education, was recommended to be put on Ritalin and other drugs. My mother, thank God, a little 5-foot white woman, fought for me, moved me around, didn't let that happen. And I found my place, and I think I'm doing all right, to all those, now. But for so many children, we are, because of this institution of slavery and discrimination that we've had in this country, you needed to demonize and dehumanize Black people, particularly Black children and Black boys, and go up the list. And that creates this culture where the 80% of the folks who are, white female teachers think that we can't achieve, and that we are not, that we're a threat, or, go down the list, all the things. And so until you remove that, and I tell some of those stories in my book, thank God I had Mr. Williams, but I had some really horrible teachers before and after him. And that, but for these men, I could have gotten encompassed. I talk about this hardening that happens for so many of our children, where they just shut down and they believe that they're not worthy of receiving love or attention, or that they have nothing to give, or that they begin to internalize the lies that have been told. So that piece, I just start there because it's still pervasive, and it's been, and now we're having a fight about, can we even tell our history, right? Can we even talk about the history that undergirds the statements I just made? That we're having that fight right now, literally. So that's important. And then obviously there are real technical things like we were talking about, like, paying teachers well, having programs that realize it's harder to be a teacher of color, and, to creating communities of practice, and giving, mentor teacher coaches, and having real strong leaders that support innovation. And, so I think that there's, having after school programs, funding, our ESOL programs appropriately, like having robust mental health services and wraparound services, community schools, all those things that I know you guys know, that it's just really priorities. Are we going to do them, or are we going to not do them? But if you're going to do them, you have to have the right people with the right mindset in them. Right. And that's really important as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we're super excited about that we're working on is the work focused on students and focused on students' voices, and helping them to say loudly and proudly what it is that they want education to look like. What are they curious about? How they want to interact with the education system, not where they walk into this room and they look around and it's like, I'm enclosed in this space and I'm supposed to learn in here, and I don't learn outside of here because y'all told me that I'm supposed to learn here, and learning seems like it's not fun because I'm supposed to learn these things that you say I'm supposed to learn. You didn't even ask me what I wanted to learn. You just started pouring stuff into me, and it doesn't matter that I'm rejecting it. It doesn't matter that I'm not engaged. It's oh, now I become, you know, the bad kid because I'm not engaged with, I'm not buying what you're selling. Right. And we definitely have to start to flip that narrative. Teachers need to, you know, educators, parents, everybody needs to unlearn the idea that that because a student is not engaged, that's something that we're doing wrong. That's not on that kid. Like if we can't find a way to meet them where they are, and guide them so that they continue to love learning, because it's you know, they at some point they loved it until they reached a place where we started making them say that it was going to be done our way. Yeah. So we have to get back to a place where students now have this voice. And so in our participatory action research, we're asking those questions, and we're going to work with students to become advocates for that education innovation that we kind of talked about. And it's one way, it's one thing for you know, policymakers to act like we don't know what we're talking about.
Right.
I want to go look in that little kid's face where that looks up and says the school lunch is really bad, and I would rather us to learn how to cook in school, and we'll make the food for everybody. Like, explain to them why that's not a possibility. You know, why earmark shouldn't be out, we should be in.
Yeah, because we have government contracts. That's why, little boy.
Amen. Amen.
So you talked about, you know, where you talk about, and I've heard you mention mentorship a number of times here. What does that look like inside and outside the school building? Effective mentorship, like what have you seen work?
Yes, yeah, I appreciate the question. Intentionality would be the number one thing. I think, you know, a lot of times if I asked you who are your 7, you know, and asked you to write that list down, it's one of the things I've been doing with the book. Like, you know, you probably would be able to write down those people who had an impact on you. Maybe you realized it over time, but there was probably some degree of intentionality with some of those people, you know, that where they took you off to the side and said and taught you something specific, or took time to listen to you when you had a problem, or you know, when they didn't have to engage with you. And I think that there's a lot of, as you all, you know, educators, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to do that in the school context. You know, how you teach someone when they get something wrong, how you correct them, how do you affirm them and help them work it out better the next time, and not, you know, how do you respond when there's harm done to some student? Do you just punish, or do you seek to be restorative, right? In the approach, both individually and at the school. You know, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for mentorship in the school building, but also outside. You know, one of my most impactful experiences with Mr. Williams was after school, where I saw him I saw him talking to one of the janitors, Black janitors at our school. And Mr. Williams, you know, just to give you a sense of him, he was like Morgan Freeman, young Morgan Freeman, you know, like brown skin, you know, like think of Morgan Freeman from Lean on Me, you know, like the suit every day, you know, the little freckles, little short bush. And he was the first Black man I'd ever seen wear a shirt and tie every day. I was amazed, you know. He walked in the classroom the first day, we were all like, oh my gosh, who is this? But so I had this very view of him, but one day after school, I see him talking to one of the janitors about like the game last night. And he's like, he's code switching. He's like, yeah, man, you know, and this guy went to, you know, and I was like, Mr. Williams, you know, like, I'm like, who are you? And you know, he showed me in that moment that you can be more than one thing. right? And we can be comfortable in our culture too, right? And so I say that because he didn't have a discussion with me about mentorship, about code switching. Right. He just did it and was supportive of me in other contexts. So I internalized that. And I saw that that was okay. And so I think you can mentor people inside in direct conversations. I'll give you another example. You can mentor people without even know you're mentoring people.
Yeah.
And just by how you carry yourself and what you do. The first time I see Barack Obama is when he's given the speech at the Democratic National Convention in Boston that put him on the national stage. Wow. And it's through my television screen, like most of us, right? And I heard him say that we need to eradicate the slander that a Black youth with the book is acting white.
Oh.
And I just was like, whoa, like, you know, I'm sure we all can relate to that, like the conflation of intelligence with whiteness, right? That we all have to deal with. So I just think there's a lot of ways, and that's what I hope to do, that we can expand it. There is no one way to mentor. There is no one right way to mentor. It's being intentional, being aware of who you are, that you have something to give, and then being willing to give of that through any medium that's available to you. And certainly personal one-on-one can be extremely impactful. So we should seek to do that. But I think we need to think about it more broadly.
Got it. Well, I mean, it's that must have been a moment, man. I remember that speech. I actually go back and I watch it from time to time, just because it was incredible, like tingling. I can only imagine what it was like to be in the room for that.
Well, absolutely. No, and I actually wasn't in the room. I was like you. I was watching it through the television screen.
Got it.
But what I'm saying is that, like, he mentored me in that moment. I didn't know him yet. I would come to know him.
Got it.
Later. But my point was that, you know, it can come in a lot of different ways. But yeah, like we were all tingly, man. You know that, you know, so.
Yeah. See, every time we will have these conversations, and there are things that I just like can't get in on, right? So like, I was in 4th grade. I don't really know. I wasn't watching the Democratic National Convention.
But you should go back and watch it, though.
I know I've watched it since, but it's just like there has to be a complete difference in growing up and then seeing this moment of a Black man be like a potential president of the United States, something that has never happened before, and being like fully conscious of what that moment meant. Yeah. I went to the second inauguration.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I went to a second inauguration, but again, like thinking about being in high school and not really like understanding the monumentalness of what I was witnessing. Right. I was just cold. Like it was right. I didn't fully like recognize it. And then now in hindsight, I'm really sitting here like, wow, I got to experience this thing that so many people never got to experience. And there are just these moments that I'll have them for myself, but it is beautiful to always see folks who from different generations express what those moments are like.
I think that's right. I agree.
It was cold that day, but it was colder the first inauguration.
Oh, the first one was freezing, boy.
Crazy.
I was there.
Oh my God, I was at both, but it's crazy. But in terms of that speech, and you know, not to belabor the point, this was the first time I was seeing him. I don't think I had seen him on anything anywhere before. It was just like, who is this guy? And he's going to be president one day. I said that to myself. I just didn't think it was going to be 4 years later. But it was amazing. But we're getting to that stage where we're going to wind down the conversation, and you talked about mentorship. So let's do some broad mentorship now. What do you have to say to young people that might find their way to listen to this conversation?
Yeah, I would say realize that, one, you are worthy of someone spending their time with you, and you have innate value, and you need to be open to these relationships to receive them. And you also have something to give. I talk about my friend Kalfani in the introduction to my book. I meet him in the 5th grade. He's the best basketball player at the school. He's the most popular kid. He's a great student. I'm the opposite of those things. I'm a chubby kid with rec specs, don't know how to play basketball. I'm awkward. And he takes me under his wing, and we become best friends. And he's really one of my first peer mentors that I have, and but because of our disparate circumstances, you know, he doesn't get the chance to engage in these same relationships. You know, he's what I call a decision kid. I'm a destination kid. Every day after school, I go to my mom's job, and that's my de facto after school program, where I encounter, you know, several of these men, my Black fathers. Calfani's mom is working 2 jobs. He goes wherever he thinks to go that day. And some days it's a good choice. Some days it's a bad choice. And he gets involved with drugs and ends up losing his life in a drug deal gone bad when we're coming out of high school. And I always think about, like, if he had these relationships. So if you have the chance to have them, be open to them. Don't harden to it. Don't believe the lies that are told about you. And then be that for somebody else, you know, whether it's someone in your class who needs help, or a younger person, or someone who's mentoring you. You know, one of the things that I was so struck by is that the other mentors, my father figures, when I told them I was writing this book, a lot of them were like, I didn't even know I was having that much impact on you.
Wow.
And so they were finding out about it in the context of me writing this book.
Wow.
And so I would just say to these young people, a little bit can go a long way. So be open to it and then give it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I will definitely be passing this on to my young people, because I think that that's something that they need to hear. So thank you. And so as we round this conversation out, let people know where they can find your work, where they can engage with you, where they can continue to just get the insightfulness that we got to experience in the 40 minutes.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm just at Will Jawando. So WILLJAWANDO on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And my website is just willjawando.com. So engage with me. You can get the book, My 7 Black Fathers, Amazon, your local bookstore, Target. It's even at airports. So wherever, just, you know, pick it up. It's on Audible. It's on all that. So appreciate you guys having me, and I appreciate what you're doing for the community.
Thank you. And now comes the point in time where you get to be the interviewer. So if you have any questions for Eva and I, please let us know.
Yeah. Are you guys a couple?
That is my father.
Father?
That's my dad. Yeah.
So when you said Eva, you were talking about this Eva?
This Eva, me. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. You got to edit that out. Because as my oldest is 12 years old, and it's like, people are like, is she 17? I'm like, no, man, she's not 17. So I apologize to you, Jamal.
You're fine. It is not the first time.
Well, it's a compliment.
Black don't crack, you know.
It's a compliment to you, my brother, and it's a compliment to you, Ava, for your maturity. So I think it's all around compliments. Come here, man. Yeah. Come around. And my little guy is coming in here, so he wants to get on. This is my youngest, William Isaiah. Say hi.
Say hi. You have a shark on your shirt? I love sharks.
Yes, that is a shark.
They're mean, but sharks are so sweet.
You like sharks? Yeah. So yeah, my apologies. Well, I guess I'll ask, how did y'all, because where I was going with that was like, how did y'all come up with the concept? You're obviously in relationship, you're in a father-daughter relationship. How'd you come up with the concept for this?
Should I take this one? Yeah. I've told this story before on the podcast, but I was in undergrad. I went to John Jay Criminal Justice College in New York City. And I was like, I am going to defeat the criminal justice system. Like that is what I wanted to do going into college. Clearly, I've taken a different route, but that route has brought me to the most beautiful thing in the world. And I think that through that process, really could not stand the idea and the trope of Black on Black crime. And one day a light bulb went off. I was watching a video where somebody said Black on Black education. And I still have the note that I wrote it down on and circled 5 times, because I knew that I don't know what this is going to be, whether it's after school programming, whether it's whatever it's going to be something. And it's important because there's a much longer tradition of Black on Black education than there is of Black on Black crime, whatever we want to call that. And so and I called him like right after class and was like, I don't know what this is going to be, but I need us to do something and I need you to help me. And what do I do first? and we like bought the domain name, got the Instagram, got the Twitter, got the Snapchat, got the TikTok, and we're like, no, TikTok wasn't a thing, but got all the things, and we're like, this is gonna be something dope. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and next time you also say, which I'm sure you know, most crime is interracial.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's always a misnomer, black on black. Yeah, most crime is white on white. Most white crime is white on white. So, I mean, it's because most crime happens with people you know in your community. So,
exactly.
Anyway, but that's awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you
so much.
We definitely appreciate the time. We look forward to, you know, connecting again in the not too distant future. You know, please keep raising these little ones inside and outside your home.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that.
I'll do it. Say bye, Isaiah.
Bye. We'll see you next week on the Black and Black Education Podcast, y'all.
Appreciate you.
Y'all. Peace.